What's going on, y'all? Welcome back to another session, and in this one we're going to go ahead and cover hypertension, which is also known as high blood pressure. We'll go ahead and get started here. This right here is what's known as the silent killer. In its primary stage, hypertension, is basically just it's not really accompanied with anything. Maybe risk factors become genetic at that point. But in most cases, hypertension is known as a secondary, right? It's in a secondary state, which basically means it's accompanied with something else. So it could be accompanied with heart disease, it could be accompanied with diabetes, right? It's usually accompanied with some other chronic disease. So that's the most common state that hypertension is in, and that's why it's called the silent killer. And it also affects over 400,000 adults per year. A little bit of how it develops. So you have two things here that's important to note. There's cardiac output and peripheral resistance. Cardiac output is basically the volume of blood that the heart discharges per minute, right? So it's the contraction of the heart as it pumps blood away. Peripheral resistance is the resistance that pump blood encounters in the arterioles, which are basically arterial branches, for blood to travel and flow through, as it carries blood to the tissues. So either or, right? Cardiac output, peripheral resistance, when any one of those numbers go up, so does your blood pressure, putting you at risk for hypertension. Well, your nervous system is one system that influences blood pressure. Your kidneys is an organ that also influences blood pressure. So here's how. Your nervous system influences blood pressure through heart muscle contractions. It also, signals hormones for regulating fluid retention and blood vessel constriction. So basically what that means is, as a matter of fact, I mentioned fluid retention, but we're gonna tie that all together here in a little bit. The kidneys, though, they influence handling hormones that are used for vasoconstriction. Now, also sodium and water retention. So I've mentioned sodium, right, as well as water, of course. But if you remember from my, this is another reminder here. If you remember from my major minerals video, sodium that's one of the body's main electrolytes, right, for fluid balance and to maintain cell integrity. Next, we're going to go into diastolic pressure over systolic pressure, right? Now, many of you may know when you get blood pressure reading, the two numbers that you get, one over the other, you have the higher number over the smaller number. The higher number is your diastolic pressure. The smaller number is your systolic pressure. Now, the diastolic is basically the force exerted by the blood on the walls of the vessels during the contraction method, right? The ventricle contraction method. The smaller number, the systolic pressure, is the same except at the ventricle's relaxation state. For those of you that don't know, the ventricle is basically a fluid-filled chamber that exists both in the heart and in the brain. What happens is blood is pumped in the atrium, or it's essentially made, I guess, in the atrium, for lack of better terms, and then pumped out to the body and the brain. The ventricle is considered the lower chambers of both respective organs, the heart and the brain. We're also going to talk about vasopressin. The reason why that's important is because we mentioned sodium, right? We mentioned fluid retention. Well, vasopressin is a hormone that reduces urine output in order to counteract and react to dehydration. Starting with Black men, we face hypertension at a rate of 40%. Black women, however, a little higher. Black women, they face hypertension at a rate of about 43%. Now, white women, 28%, and white men, 30%. Asian males, about 29%, and Asian women, about the same amount. Native Americans, they face it at about 26%. And here's where things get interesting because, I mentioned in the past, couple videos where I talked about diabetes and cholesterol. As we age, things start to slow down, right? Some of our bodily functions, whatnot, tend to slow down a little bit. So, we got to be a little bit more mindful and, a little bit more proactive about the vitamins, minerals we take, the nutrients that we intake and consume. Men between the ages of 55 and 64 face hypertension at a rate of about 54%. And for women in the same age bracket, 53%, just a percentage point smaller. Going even higher in age, those that are 75 and up, for men, we're looking at 67%, women 78%. So for women that are over the age of 75, women tend to face hypertension at a higher rate than even the men. We are going to go over the classification of, whether you're in normal, pre-hypertension, hypertension stage 1 or stage 2. Starting with the diastolic and systolic pressures, you're considered normal if your diastolic pressure is less than 120 millimeters and your systolic pressure is 80 or less. You're in pre-hypertension stage though if you are between 120 to 129, and normally in pre-hypertension stage, most doctors won't consider that a big deal. Because our blood pressure does go up for different reasons, right? It may not be that we are in hypertension stage. It may not be that we're actually overweight or that we're not eating right or what have you. When you do something as simple as cardio, right? When you do anything that gets your heart rate up, of course your blood pressure is gonna go up because, that's your body now has to produce more oxygen for your body to be able to support your physical activity in whatever you're doing, be it cardio, weightlifting, HIIT, whatever it is, right? Swimming, which is a form of cardio essentially. But when you're doing physical activity of sorts, your blood pressure will go up. But that's not a cause for alarm. That's what's supposed to happen. Because as you're getting your heart rate up, your body is in a state where it's got to produce more oxygen for you. You're in hypertension stage 1 though if your reading for diastolic is 130 to 139 and if your systolic is 80 to 89. And then last but not least, hypertension stage 2, 140 or up, you're in hypertension stage 2 for the diastolic pressure, the bigger number. And then for the smaller number, the systolic, you are in hypertension stage 2 if you're 90 or up. Now, I wrote this right here, it might be a little hard to see, but I'll just go ahead and say it for you. You could have a normal diastolic, but end up having a higher systolic. So if your blood pressure is 120 over 90, even though this number is normal, this is high. So you're still gonna be considered in hypertension stage. Consequently though, if your blood pressure is 140, right, for the diastolic, the bigger number, but the smaller number is 80 or less, you're still in hypertension stage. Or that's at least how you'll most likely get diagnosed, because this number is high. Or this number is high, that one's low, doesn't really matter. You want both numbers to be low. The typical pressure, right, normal pressure would typically be about 120 over 80, right? Or anything less on both sides, less than 120, less than 80. Unless of course, if it's too low, then you'll enter a stage of what's called hypotension, which is abnormally low blood pressure. For the most part, hypertension is the one that's the most common. Hypotension does occur, every now and again, but it's not as common as hypertension is. For the contributors, okay, there are, as you can imagine, just like with diabetes, a lot of contributors. So the first one I put is smoking. Now, researchers have found that with smoking, it's kind of a difficult relationship, right? It's been difficult to establish a relationship between smoking and hypertension. But what they have found is smoking does interfere with nitric oxide, which is why they have decided that hypertension, does kind of, correlate with smoking. Nitric oxide is a neurotransmitter, okay? So you can imagine when you smoke a cigarette, if it interferes with your neurotransmission activities, that can be a problem, right? Neurotransmitter, that's part of your nervous system. You need that to send nerves and, or send signals rather throughout your body. Nitric oxide helps to relax the blood vessels, and you definitely need that to be able to allow nutrients, of course, blood, and, energy to enter. It also helps regulate your reproductive system. So now, this one is more so for the men. I'm sorry, I don't really mean to chuckle, but it just kind of made me think, when I was reading about it. In regulating your reproductive system, one thing that is commonly found with a lot of men who have erectile dysfunction is that they smoke. So if for no other reason, you're not performing well, or, you're just kind of noticing you're not really getting up, that might be cause for you to maybe look at discontinued smoking. And then the next thing nitric oxide does is it protects the endothelium, which is basically the layer of cells that line the blood vessels. So you definitely want that, okay? You can't lose that protection either. Nitric oxide is an antimicrobial agent, and what that does is it sterilizes food as it enters your system. Food that you consume, as it enters, it sterilizes that food to lessen the risk of food poisoning. Now also, another contributor is, now here's how, again, we'll tie everything together: excessive sodium intake, and conversely, constantly depleted potassium. I want to go ahead and bring this video out. When you intake too much sodium, you could be looking at hypertension, and with hypertension comes risk of different heart diseases, such as atherosclerosis. Enough said, right? The next contributor is stress. As is with anything, right? Stress is it might as well be a silent killer, honestly. I know it's not really a chronic disease or anything, but a fair amount of people handle stress by eating a lot, right? They stress eat, and of course that puts on weight, which, lead you to the chronic diseases, to include hypertension, strokes, diabetes, and heart disease, right? Physical inactivity, common theme, right? So physical inactivity, especially when combined with some of the other contributors, can definitely put you at risk for hypertension. Obesity, that's of course another one, right? Obesity, when you have so much weight on you, when you're in an obese state, obesity is bad for you because, of course, especially in the abdominal area, one thing that you can end up developing with hypertension, high blood pressure, and as it relates to blood in the heart, is atherosclerosis. And what atherosclerosis is it's a heart disease where the body has, you built up so much plaque as a result of the fatty acids that are just so abundant in your body. They convert over to plaque. And what they do is they, essentially just stick to your artery walls. And what it does is so you have a pathway for blood to transport, right? To flow through. Well, what happens is that plaque starts to narrow that passageway even more, which makes blood flow difficult through those passageways. And that's what ends up leading you to atherosclerosis and even heart attacks. Elevated LDL cholesterol levels. Now that really ties into what I just said, honestly. When your LDL spikes, atherosclerosis is another result of what happens when you get high LDL, and it's been high for a long time. LDL, the low density lipoproteins, that's your bad cholesterol. Goes back to what I had just mentioned with the obesity contributor. Next, of course, is excessive alcohol intake. Not only is it bad for you, with the hypertension, but it's also bad for your liver too. Diabetes is a contributor to hypertension, right? That's what I was saying earlier in the video about hypertension being, like a stage, or, like a secondary type of stage where it's accompanied with another chronic disease. And then, of course, last but not least, age, specifically for men that are over 55 and women that are over 65. Age is a contributor. So, as you get older, again, be mindful, be proactive, listen to your doctors, obviously, and, pay attention to, your body, and make sure that you're not consistently consuming foods that you probably shouldn't be, right? Processed foods and things like that, which is how you get elevated LDL cholesterol levels as well as obesity, right? You want to be mindful of that. Now, some of the remedies that you want to see if you can discontinue smoking. You don't want it to interfere with nitric oxide, which is necessary for blood vessels anyway. Also, increase potassium and conversely decrease sodium. The DASH diet, I'm gonna go over that at the end of this. Weight management, okay, so weight management is a remedy. You wanna, of course, that kind of goes with physical activity. As you increase physical activity, you start eating better. The weight's essentially gonna take care of itself. The more weight you shed, the more fat you drop, the less at risk you are for hypertension. And of course, reduce alcohol consumption, right? That's basically a given. And then de-stress methods, okay? So since stress was a contributor, if you do stress a lot, you do want to see if you can find certain outlets that will help you de-stress. That could be something as simple as working out. Maybe it's doing yoga, or maybe it's, even playing games. If it helps you to de-stress, make sure you do it. As long as it's healthy, make sure that you're de-stressing too, if you do happen to stress a lot. All right, so I had to go a little old school here because, it's a lot to write on the back side of my board. So I figured I would print it out for myself, and then I'm gonna have the chart right up here so that you could kind of follow along with it. What DASH is, it's an eating plan, right? It's a diet that helps stop hypertension. As a matter of fact, that's what DASH stands for. It's Dietary Approach to Stop Hypertension. And what it basically is it's a nice balanced eating plan to make sure that you're, increasing your potassium, decreasing your sodium levels, increase fiber, and basically anything else that will help counteract hypertension or prevent it. So we're gonna start with the first food group. Basically, you got grains and grain products. So food group that you should get the most servings of per day. As you see, it says 7 to 8. That could be anything from a slice of bread to cereal, to pasta, and the significance to the DASH diet is basically it's a major source of energy as well as fiber, right? Fiber is important, soluble and insoluble. Vegetables, of course, is the next thing, and fruits, right? Both the servings are the same with veggies or fruits. You want 4 to 5 servings per day. So you just kind of pick whatever your favorite fruits are, just kind of combine them a little bit. Make sure you're getting 4 to 5 servings a day. And you want that because, veggies and fruits are a great source of potassium. Also magnesium and fiber, right? So you need those as well. The next, fat-free dairy foods. So you want about 2 to 3 servings per day. The reason why is because even though it's lower, because of course, low fat and fat free, it is lower in fat, but if you gotta also still be careful about dairy products, make sure they're not processed, right? But you do still need dairy products because that's where you get your sources of calcium and in some cases even vitamin D, right? But for the most part, calcium and protein is what's focused on here in the DASH diet. Meats, poultry, and fish. Select only lean, and you see that in the examples in the notes section over here. Only lean meats. Processed meats tend to, increase your risk of hypertension. If not by sodium count, then definitely by fatty count, right? Fatty acids and fat content. Okay, because processed meats and poultry and whatnot tend to have saturated and trans fats. And as mentioned in the cholesterol video, those overconsumption of those types of fats can increase your LDL levels. Meats, poultry, and fish are good sources of protein, obviously, as well as magnesium. I want to note that not everybody is a meat eater, of course. I got maybe vegetarian, vegan dieters. There's some other options, whole grains, right? And all of that stuff. There's even some plant-based meals that you can eat that still do provide good sources of magnesium, protein, and even some of the, vitamins too, and minerals. Now, the next thing is nuts, seeds, and dry beans. You want 4 to 5 servings of that per week. Mind you, that's per week and not per day. They are good sources of energy, magnesium, and potassium and protein as well as fiber. But of course, nuts, seeds, and dry beans, it depends, right? You want to be careful about, where you get those sources from. If you eat, say, peanut butter, I just use that as an example, because I know when I was in high school, I used to actually eat peanut butter out the jar. Like I would just have a spoon and just eat peanut butter out the jar to get protein, because I was in a weight building stage, right? I was in a muscle building stage. So peanut butter does have a good source of protein, but it can be fatty. It can be high in saturated fats, because there's a little bit of hydrogenation involved in the process. Almonds are a good source. Cashews, right? Like regular Planters peanuts, unsalted, mind you, because again, DASH diet is trying to focus on less sodium. So if you go get Planters nuts, peanuts or what have you, you want to make sure that you're selecting from unsalted options. It may not taste that great, I know, but if you're at risk for hypertension or you're currently dealing with it, then you got to make those changes, right? Also, fats and oils, 2 to 3 per day, right? And the DASH has about 27% of calories as fat, including fat in or added to foods. So you want to choose from, margarine as opposed to butter, right? Because even though margarine has some fat in it, it's still a better choice than butter is. You do want to be careful about how much you use. That's why it says 2 to 3 servings per day. But, if you can do a little less than that, cool. There's always other fatty options to choose from. But If you do that, definitely look at like the light stuff. So light salad dressing, low-fat mayonnaise. Honestly, first time I've ever heard of low-fat mayonnaise, if I'm being honest with you. I didn't know there was a such thing. I don't eat mayonnaise anyway, so, vegetable oil, definitely. So like such as olive, corn, canola, or safflower. I use those oils. I use olive, I use canola, and I use avocado oils when I cook. I don't even use butter or margarine or anything like that. I use oils anyway because these oils have mono and polyunsaturated fats in them. And those are the types of fats you need to reduce your LDL levels, increase HDL, and even fight off, certain inflammatory. It has inflammatory fighting properties. Last but not least, you got sweets. And it says here 5 per week. So 5 servings per week, not per day. Obviously, sweets, they're not that great for you if, you're eating them in mass amounts, right? Because again, sweets like desserts, pastries, chocolates, candies, things like that, they may have high sodium too, right? It's maybe a lot of salt in them. And definitely you can count on there being a lot of sugar, right? So, and added sugars too, which is definitely something you want to stay away from, is the added sugars, refined sugars, the artificial flavors and sweetenings, those are the things you want to stay away from anyway. So that's why they recommend, 5 per week here. I've always been told dark chocolate is the better type of chocolate for you if you're going to eat that. But even then, I would still say be mindful, in the amounts that you consume. That's basically what the DASH diet does. It's literally an approach to stop hypertension. So it focuses on you eating more whole grains, veggies, fruits, and then it's kind of like, think about the food pyramid. That's the best way I can describe the DASH diet. You have the food pyramid. At the very bottom is going to be your whole grains and things like that. Then following that is your fruits, veggies, some oils and fats and things like that. That's basically the best way I can describe it. So what's at the very bottom is what you're gonna have the most of, and then as you go up, when you get to the top, that's what you're gonna have the least of. So at the very top will be sweets. That's gonna be like your little part of the pyramid. You're gonna have that's a use sparingly type of deal. Now that concludes the video for hypertension. So if you enjoyed this video, go ahead and give it a like, right? Give it a thumbs up. Feel free to comment, definitely share, subscribe if you feel inclined. Any comments, questions, concerns, in my comment section, because I do check them periodically. And that's pretty much it, y'all. I really hope y'all enjoyed this one. This has been hypertension. Definitely a silent killer. I know there's some of y'all out there that deal with it. I myself, it does run in my family. My father, as long as I've been growing up, he's the one that, as far as my immediate family goes, he's the one that I know that was dealing with high blood pressure the most, since I was a kid. Of course, the job that he had probably didn't help, and it happens, right? Because again, stress. That's what it can come from, many jobs too. So if you work in a type of job that, does give you stress, again, it's important to find ways to de-stress, right? And my dad was a police officer. So obviously you can imagine, very stressful job. He's since retired now for a few years. So I'm really glad for that. I'm glad he could make it there, but it didn't come without a struggle, right? High blood pressure, that was a common thing for as long as I can remember when it came to him. So check in on your people, and maybe show them this video, or, just do your own research too. In addition, make sure that you're getting all the knowledge that you need in order to fight hypertension. Hopefully this all helps you guys out, and I will see y'all in the next video. Y'all take care. Thank you.